Hi, welcome back to my channel. I wanted to do a video because I have literally not been on my YouTube guide for a very long time, and all of a sudden I feel that magic that it takes to hopefully get myself up and running on the YouTube guide again. So because I feel like I literally was listening to my old podcasts the other day, and it was very much like, when I'm going through something, this is the time when I care to make a podcast, because it's like, when someone listens to that, like, there's just a level of passion to it, and I'm like, we share our experiences. It helps me relieve myself, but it also will be interesting to other people because it's emotionally charged by something. No one wants to hear a story about nothing. I mean, I do. I love the peaceful times, but moving swiftly on. I feel like I was just doing some research into karma the other day, and I feel like, because I've always been this believer of, like, if you're fucked, like, whether I consciously knew it as past lives or what, I think past lives is more of a Hindu or Buddhist thing. I honestly can't remember. I probably sound like a religious invalid by that, but it's just, I can't remember which one this is, but I've always thought, if you're not in this lifetime like a particularly rich person, or a particularly smart person, or a particularly popular person, etc., you will in another lifetime have that different karma. And the fact is, if you fuck someone over during that time, you are going to set yourself up for bad karma, and that has always been something that I've been highly resonant with. But that being said, it's tricky, when you're dealing with people in life, because I do think there is a sense to a lot of people, which has always grated on me, of, just because I grew up in a family that I think, though very dysfunctional in their own particular ways, and I'm not saying my family was anywhere near functional, because I would be lying, but I will say that, I also grew up with a sense of, be that narcissistic or otherwise, morals and understanding of logistics of the world. And with that, it really kind of can grind my gears when people are ignorant. But the sense is, it is and uninformed. But it's the fact that, I was also brought up religious, and I definitely believe that, everyone has a purpose on this planet. Everyone has, there might be someone that is really uneducated on history and the logistics of different nationalities. I've always taken that under my wing because I've got a completely, I live in the UK, and my mother is completely un-English, so I've always taken that very seriously. I have had my own racist generational traits to fix, but I also think, and that has been massive. So, I have to also look at it like that, because I also think, with the law of relativity, I wouldn't say that, everything, I don't know if everything you pass you can relate to on some degree. I don't know if that's a thing, because I don't know. I mean, you could probably look at it that way. That's getting a little bit expansive for what I was really trying to focus on, or will let that be food for thought. But it's when you pass someone that's ignorant, and other things will grind on different people's gears. Do you know what I mean? So it really depends at what point you are in life. And otherwise, I will be the first to hold my hands up and say, I lean towards the air of manipulation. So if someone is fucking me off, or I've got bad vibes with someone, I will consciously be a bitch, and I will and it takes a while for me to get to this point, but no, if I'm triggered, the first thing I will do is go to be a bitch. Someone even called me a bitch in sort of passing the other day, and I stood there and I thought, because they thought it was hilarious, they didn't think I noticed, but I was like, do you know what, yes, I am a bitch, and I'm a parent, so I'm in touch with that bitch, and yes, well done, you've observed that correctly, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to fold because you're sat there calling me a bitch. It just means that I'm a bitch. Do you know what I mean? I'm okay with that. Someone else might consider, I'm sure I've got ignorance towards particular aspects of society and things in general. Do you know what I mean? But I would call myself relatively not on the ignorant side, just because of whatever my life has thrown at me. And I think from my experience when navigating life's challenges in general, to be able to connect with that sense of relativity and that sense of contrast, in the fact of, yes, I feel compared to the average person, because of the fact my generational line was predisposed to mental illness, I have seen the roughest ends of, you know, the spectrum in terms of generational trauma and things like that in a lot of aspects, but so have a lot of people which haven't experienced mental illness aside. Like, I've experienced a lot of like hardcore like generational trauma to correct, some of which I am still in the process of dealing with. But it's like, when like it's not like universally, like, this is my ego that I'm still trying to correct. Like, it's not my right then, just because I get so funny. Like, I'm not trying to be a bitch. I love education is fantastic, but what really fucks me off is when people use their ignorance and their generational trauma and their lack of self-development as an excuse for their uni degrees, and they come out and they think that they can treat anyone however they want, and it's really rude and it's really taken very offensively. I have to take into the account that, like, a lot of people may have, you know, autism and Asperger's and things like that, where they're not aware of like social ways to talk to people, and this is how I've digested that in a lot of circumstances, because it can really grind on me, because I think regardless of what educational level you're at, you still have to navigate the world in a socially correct way, and you can't mass scapegoat groups of people, and you can't be ignorant to a lot of people unless you want to meet that backlash at whatever extent that looks like. So that being said, that has grounded my gears, but obviously this is what I mean in a sense of ignorance that a lot of people face. This person may be very high up in a corporate ladder and do a lot of shit that filtrates back to me in the benefit system. Do you know what I mean? So we'll look at that and we'll be like, okay, well, that's cool, you know, that's fine, but it doesn't, on a personal level, this is some conditioning that I massively was going through recently. Sorry, this spiritual awakening sense. On a one-to-one level, though, just because you do a lot for society doesn't mean that you can treat me with rudeness because you filtrate through the system in a way that might or might not affect me directly. Universally, that doesn't make sense, but equally, it is also, I get funny with that. But that's someone's generational trauma, that's someone's neurodivergence that I'm tackling there. But it also comes down to, if I am, you know, if I feel like I've leveled in some way or another, because I do think that, like, it comes in roundabouts sometimes when it comes to ignorance, neurodivergence and stuff like that. In some cases, sometimes you can get the wrong end of the stick with someone, and really you're really barking up the wrong tree, and I am aware of that. But I also think sometimes ignorance can be really annoying, actually, just really annoying. And as I said, I have my own annoying traits, and I like to tap into that in the everyday life to coincide with the fact I am the bitch that I just said, and that's okay, because we all give what we get, really, when it comes down to it. But I think from a navigational perspective, as someone that has a very quick way to jump towards anger, I feel like my battle with my generational trauma and mental illness included within that, I would probably bracket to one degree or another, does not then justify me feeling like I have a level up on everyone that's not done their work yet. Like, it comes down to, you know, you have to navigate people at all stages and phases of their, you know, development, and all stages of their karma, actually. And I'm sure there's a lot of phases within my karma where people were like, you know, because I had major depression in school. Let's use that as an example. What do you call major depression? I went through a depressive episode, basically, in school, and it was pretty bad. I was on acne pills, so that was a massive reason as to why that came about. But I'm sure a lot of my friends found that I could have been a drag at that point of view, though they're very nice about it. And it's that sort of thing where people had to meet me at my state of being at that time, even though it wasn't at its optimal level. But I mean, you know, I like to think as well, and this is just a level of my generational trauma, you know, a lot of people who are in touch with their inner child are, you know, the healthiest that human beings can be. I feel like I definitely grew up in a family where I felt very much minimized as a child. So I was like, oh, as an adult, I'm going to have all my shit together. Like, everything's going to be perfect. Everything's going to be great. I'm going to be away from all this crap and generational trauma, and my inner child will never have to ever worry about anything again. But that is just not logistically healthy, and it's not logistically healthy. It's an inner child coping mechanism, really, to life in general, because it's massive just reintegrate my inner child within myself in general, because I feel like I definitely felt very shut down in a lot of aspects, and I sort of perpetuated that. But it's like, where I'm going with this is to say, if you shut down your own inner child, and because it's a childish mentality that a lot of people have, and I notice that it's actually, because I have a lot of, let's just say I know a lot of people who have family members and things like that up the corporate ladder very high, making hundreds of thousands of pounds. So I know people that are very well educated, toppest level uni degrees, and I'm not being funny. I won't say that if you haven't been to uni you can't go to uni, because someone very close to me has just got like 89% in a uni course when they got expelled from school, so that's pretty impressive if you ask me. So I just feel like schooling is very different now than it must have been back in the day, and people with untreated ADHD and generational trauma, we all get there when we get there, and I feel like you can't sort of minimise the youth and the croons really to be, as I say, there's a whole lot of aspects, but to minimise one aspect of people, to be like, okay, well, you're like a lot of people that go and get jobs, you're going to consist, humans are stupid, they are really very simple creatures, and they are very much like headless chickens, I feel like, when it comes to judging other people. But as I say, you are accumulating bad karma. I can't control other people, but let's just put that one out there. Because if it's one person's karma to be up the corporate ladder, in the next lifetime they may well be completely broken, completely, mentally unwell, which I can probably see a lot of people that I've met actually going down that bracket pretty rapidly. If I'm honest, I have observed that quite a lot myself. And it's also to say, like, it goes the other way as well. Just because you're on the corporate ladder or you're in a successful job and you cope well with your life at this time, doesn't mean you don't struggle with your mental health, doesn't mean you don't struggle with generational trauma. That's just the part of life that you're in. And I think that's important as well, because it's easy to feel segregated with your people and feel like you're, it's you against the world, which I feel like, again, generational trauma can into this state we're at, and it obviously comes to everyone in, different waves, and that's for good reasons. I'm not one to challenge the universe in that sense, we're all on our own journey, but I feel like literally this is purely motivated at this point from me navigating my predisposition towards anger. But as I say, so just because, one, or myself actually, let's use that, would come to things with the idea of, I've overcome all this trauma, I've done all this work on this fucking toxic as fuck family line, and I've got all this, autonomy that I didn't used to have, and blah, 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 and I'm really like, that's a massive achievement, and I've met a lot of people like that, as well as in the same way, we all have our different karma, whether you work really hard on yourself, because you've got fuck tons of generational trauma and shit, because there's so many people, like, it took me meeting someone that got sectioned recently to be able to remember just how fucked people's circumstances can be, where you have absolutely no clue about how the fuck they ended up in a cycle. Do you know what I mean? A lot of people will look at people and it's like, want to be like, oh, you've got like pure disposition to mental illness, all of a sudden you're plodding along with everyone else and boom, mental illness hit you. A lot of the time, really, 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 really horrible life circumstances will trigger that for very long periods of time, and it's really pretty tragic. But yeah, that was just another sort of thing I had to which is also completely wrong. As I say, it's not for me to then be able to minimise another person's, and I'm talking on a group collective here, because I think there's definitely a sense to say that there is massively a difference as to what you can expect on a one-to-one with other people as a group collective within for different people. So because in that way I'm sort of trying to being sort of spoken to rudely on a one-to-one within like and also different scales of interaction. So say you're in a shop and someone's having a bad day, or they've had a busy customer, or someone in the last customer had been rude to them, so they kind of follow that mood swing on the next person. That is, to a degree, is what you can tolerate and what you can't, because I think when people mental illness and emotional instability, and psychological instability and such like that, it's really easy to overly clamp down on the normalcies of the world, which are sort of within the everyday. But I also think like a lot of people will kind of press those buttons quite easily, and I think it's also important to pick up on that, like when that happens as well, because you know, we've all got a fucking cycle, do you know what I mean? Women, men, whatever, children, old people. I mean, unless that starts with the menstrual cycle, I honestly don't know about that, I can't comment. But we all have a cycle, and it's, you know, some things are justifiable and some things aren't. And I think, you know, for me, mass ignorance towards myself or other people, whether that looks like racism or whether it looks like people with mental health issues or anyone else, would probably, I mean, as I say, you have to look at it on a collective level or a personal level, because I also think I also think generational trauma in this degree actually can translate into many different social sectors as well, when it comes to how rich you are, how poor you are. Like, I've seen a lot of people, actually it's massively prevalent, having gone to an outstanding school, actually. I will advocate a couple of outstanding schools, one of which is now not an outstanding school, but regardless of that, high level schools, borderline private schools, there's a massively high level of neurodivergence, undiagnosed neurodivergence within the upper class sector, which I think is minimised by sectors, because it can actually be hidden by money a lot of the time, and it's really toxic, it's really unhealthy. It's become very, very minimised. And that sucks, you know, but it also, you know, because neurodivergence, I think, also can be a massive contributing factor to, you know, the way that people manoeuvre life and actually their belief systems in general. Because, you know, the simple math is that if you've got a high level of autism and you've experienced social exclusion on that level, you know, you will internalise that people just don't like you because you're unlikable. Whereas, like, the fact is you've probably just got some undiagnosed neurodivergence and probably generational trauma related to that. And it's not, and I think it's about the unpacking of people's karmic space, because we've all gone through that. I honestly believe, like, on a karmic level, like, we all have our levels as to which we are karmically debted one thing or another, be that neurodivergence, be that money, be that whatever that might or might not look like. And for me, I just have to navigate it from that level, because I'm a very spiritual person. I can't look at someone and be like, oh, they're just a person though. Like, I can from one level, but in my core I don't understand it. I'm a spiritual person, and I find it difficult sometimes to justify someone's ignorance or someone's rudeness because they are uneducated about the truth of a situation. Or, you know, it's one thing having a bad day, but it's another thing having perpetual ignorance towards life in general and hurting a lot of people in the process, and then getting shitty because, you know, this is what I mean, we're all in touch with our inner child. And as I say, I can't control anyone or anything, but I just thought it'd be interesting to talk about how I would then navigate that, because you kind of sometimes, I feel like if you're in touch with your gut, really. And I think sometimes people can be out of touch with their gut when they are conditioned into coercive control, or they can be highly traumatized and things like that. It's really hard to actually, or should I say your divine connection rather than your gut, actually. I think sometimes certain things happen where, like, either if it's a, you know, family member or anyone else, and I get this, you know, and I also think it's your nationality sometimes. I think being brought up in a European way to one degree or another, I sort of was brought up relatively social in some aspects, and then when other people wouldn't like match that, I would consider them quite rude, and I've seen that happen so many times. I later saw that within, you know, because people reject in themselves aspects of other people that they don't understand. People reject aspects of other people, aspects of themselves that they don't understand, and the fact is we've all got aspects of other people within us that, you know, it's possible to understand, and that's just like something I need to bear in mind, you know, however toxic that looks like. Because I think also I think this is just another epiphany moment for me, when you come from a toxic family, or you come from a family that is perpetuated with mental illness, you can also be like, I wouldn't say it's a childlike justification, but it's a human level justification of, I never have to deal with anyone else with mental illness or undiagnosed neurodivergence, and it hits you really hard. At the end of the day, you can have wounds around something and still navigate it in the world, because if you don't, you will fall at your, you will be, subject to your own demise. Do you know what I mean? It's like anything. You can have a lot of trauma around something and still push that button of autopilot into, do you know what? I don't like speaking to people. And I'm talking about to whatever degree this makes sense. I've gone through periods where I don't, because I'm an introvert, where I've literally not spoken to anyone for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and months. I wouldn't say months, actually, weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and then I'll make a phone call, and then I'll be on my own again for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And that worked for me because I really needed to detox the people that I really wouldn't have chosen to be around, but kind of was in passing due to institutionalization. As I say, we all have our own journey and our own path, but it's like when you can, I think, look at people's a place in life that they are, because because life only gets harder, I feel like, when dealing with the more you adult, the more you kind of experience people that really are out of line, and the more weight that the universe, look at the universal level, this is how it makes sense to me. The more leveled up you are somewhere, the more the universe will bring you more of that same boat to be able to navigate. And that can be really, really challenging sometimes. But if you look at it in that way, it's like, yes, I am blessed with this level of education and this level of awareness and self-control in this aspect or another. But at the end of the day, not everyone does, and that is actually a massive level down. And to hold, I wouldn't say to hold space for that, because I think it's tricky to, when people talk about this level of empathy, I feel like I consider myself having a level of empathy, but I also don't consider myself to have empathy to spare. Like, I'm not going to sit there and be like, oh, there's a bloke over there and he's just like a random bloke, I'm just going to give him all my empathy. That's not quite how it works. And I think when they talk about empathy, I think a lot of the time your empathy, quote unquote, can be blocked by trauma, and it can be blocked by resentment and negative emotion, because you're not in touch with that within yourself. You don't feel that it's healthy in someone else, so therefore you attack that within someone else because you feel it should be attacked. And I've definitely been there massively myself, and it's a process for everyone in that degree. And I think that's also a lot of the time where people can fall out of social cohesion, because there's a massive, I think it comes down to, and obviously we have been through a pandemic, and I think it will take time to sort of readjust the social expectations for the people that have actually survived that epidemic. But it's when people don't hold that necessary space. There is a level of necessary space that human beings need to hold for one another given their life circumstances, and that is, it's kind of a given. Do you know what I mean? Like, I literally, oh my god, just as a little tag off from this, I was on Instagram, and I was watching this person that was sharing something about being trans or something, and it was like a woman's ovary, a black woman's ovary, a white woman's ovary, Asian woman's ovary, a trans woman's ovary space, and it was like basically whatever the hell trans women have in their ovary space. And it's like, do you know what, like, respect people's physiology. And I was like, I commented and I was like, how sad is that you have to comment that to highlight in people's brains that, like, there's nothing wrong with them, they're not mentally unwell, they just have a different physiology. And I was like, how sad is that? Like, I had to have it. I will admit that, like, I have made faces sometimes. People reject what they don't understand, because we are trained to hold space for our survival. But equally, it's important. I mean, I just think for me, it's important not to sidestep that level of, we have a 3-part brain of the lizard brain, of the middle brain of whatever the hell that is, your decision-making brain, and your prefrontal cortex. Oh no, prefrontal cortex is your decision-making brain. Sorry, your logic-finding brain. and then your prefrontal cortex. That's the 3 levels: your decision making, your logic finding, and your lizard brain. So your lizard brain will be activated if you feel that you're in a fight or flight response. And often as well, let's not forget that people that have trauma, in whatever degree that looks like, and let's not reduce that to undiagnosed neurodiversity and unnoticed neurodiversity, because I have throughout lockdown seen undiagnosed neurodiversity be very, very, very prevalent in a lot of people that have absolutely no idea what the fuck is going on. And you can laugh, but you can also find that it has to you have to hold space for that, because you're dealing with them. And I think I would rather be someone who can hold compassion for other people rather than be triggered within myself, because I haven't had compassion held for me at other points. It's about saying I'm going to break the cycle with myself and be like, I would rather make that narrow pathway to say, yes, I'm dealing with my trauma, and make that active choice. And this is what used to happen when I was in talking therapy, where like it'd be like, yes, but you don't have to follow that same neuropathology anymore. You can make that decision to be like, actually, yes, I have been treated with this ignorance. I have been treated with this neurodivergent, untreated neurodivergence, this mental illness perspective, or this racist perspective, this, that, or the other. But I can actually make that, and I can make that step forward to move through my life with a different story and a different way of navigating things. And that's a personal choice of my own, and that is my own power, and that will help me grow and be transcend my challenges given to me within the universe. Do you know what I mean? Because I think a lot of the time when people are stuck in their same stories and their same pathology and in their same patterns, it limits their leveling up in such a massive degree that they can be like, oh, well, I'm just depressed, like I don't understand why I'm depressed, or I'm just, people have like really severe mental illness. And I think, as I say, it comes in levels. Sometimes you can get to the point where you're so mentally out of it because of your generational trauma that has taken such a hold of you that you're not actually aware of what your patterns are, and then that takes a very long time to come back from. I will advocate. But it's when, this is therapeutic, tried and tested treating severe mental illness, because I've seen it myself, that they say, it's a CBT level, sometimes cognitive behavioural therapy, which I don't really get into that at the moment because I have spoken about that before. But regardless of techniques that they use in the psychiatric system, I'm clearly not a psychologist, but it's just to say that, like, to choose a new route in a social level and in a day-to-day functioning level and in a decision-making level, and to choose to count to 10, even if it's really triggering. You know what I mean? And sometimes it's really triggering for me to experience certain emotions, actually, from other people, certain reactions from other people, because I've seen, because often this is the way it often goes generational trauma-wise, is that reaction will have been seen by a caregiver or a caregiver's caregiver, and then generationally you are kind of taught to mass avoid the feeling of inadequacy. Yeah, and I think this sometimes, when I look at my past mental illness and the way I've had to just be forced to step back, I wasn't sectioned, but I was forced to step back from my life as it was, and the general normalcies of general day-to-day functioning that most people go about: work, life, this, that, the other, take medication to slow my brain and to correct certain chemicals that were misfiring, shall we say, as my brain structure crumbled so badly at that point. It helps you to, when you take that judgment from other people of, oh, what are you even doing with your life? Like, why are you lazy? Why have you gained weight? Because these medications make you gain weight. Why are you I had generational eating anorexia in our family, like generational anorexia, and then I was forced to take medication. Oh, and by the way, you can't have anorexia without being underweight. FYI, I saw that on Instagram, that is a thing. And it's a brutal fucking neuro issue, I will say, it's horrible. But that really, sometimes that sort of level of like smacking it in the face, smacking a pathology within the face and doing that hardcore, like, boom, like whacking your pathology in the face with something completely opposite, or forcing yourself to face like the fear. It's like so powerful. It's so powerful, and I feel like some people do that actually on a level that people don't pick up at the time or whatever. People are not as clever as the universe is. They are a part of the universe, but they're not. The universe is very clever, and there's a lot of aspects to that which can be somewhat or another predictable if you look at the law of attraction and the law of assumption and things like that. But people aren't as like that because of their human biases and such like that. But also I have found that if you treat people with respect and you lay it on thick, you can often get past a lot of shit, to be honest, that even if they're having a bad day, you can actually put someone in a bad mood. And I feel like for myself, as what I would say, has never not had empathy really, or a level of aspect of connection to that. It doesn't come from a place of I want to be empathic to another person. It comes from a place of I don't want to lose my mind and I need to keep my shit together. Irritating me just because you've had a bad day. As I say, I do feel like on a relative level, taking from my other observations from the universe in previous times, relatively, I feel like you have a certain amount of bad shit that goes down in the day and a certain amount of good shit that goes down in the day. And if this is if you have some really bad shit, generally, often I find, this is why finding silver linings for things can really bring a lot of stability. So if someone fucks you off in one aspect, in one element or another, to just find that silver lining to say, yes, someone has fucked me off, but that will be all of my bad karma for the day. Cool. Hopefully you can but hope. Sometimes you can have real bad other things that happen, but it's okay, cool, well that has kind of been lifted off my shoulders. Maybe I won't have so many other irritating people within my day that's going to bother me, you know what I mean? And looking at it like that can just be okay, well, whew, sort of thing, let's move swiftly on now. Do you know what I mean? Because the more my frontal lobe develops, I am self-diagnosed ADHD, and probably should be professionally diagnosed, but the thing about ADHDers is that they find it really hard, their frontal lobe doesn't always fully develop. It develops to a degree, but it develops late, and if it develops at all, it's by about 28. And I'm 27, and I feel like my frontal lobe is slowly trying to trickle down and do its job to whatever degree possible. But at the end of the day, it is going to it's sometimes ADHDers have to have more of a grip on themselves when it comes to ignorant people that, as I say, you're not holding space for an ADHDer. That's not, the world doesn't owe you anything. This is the levels which I've gone through before. The world doesn't owe you anything, but it's you have to care about yourself. And I think anyone that will give a fuck about my logic and listen to the podcast what I put into the universe, I would say, will see that you will have to it's all about yourself, really. And I think in the astrological era we're in of Aquarius, you have to work from yourself, and the world doesn't owe you anything. Your neighbour doesn't owe you anything. The person across the street doesn't owe you anything. The person at your mum group doesn't owe you anything. Do you know what I mean? We all kind of navigate the world with our own direction, for the good and for the bad. And I think generational trauma will affect anyone, and to hold that space for other people is always going to help you navigate things with a more healthier way. Because I think it's also about, sometimes it just helps me go around to the level of how would I like to be perceived. Because I very recently just cut my hair because I had this massive wad of hair glue in there and I really couldn't handle it anymore. It was really painful, so I was fuck it, pixie cut. And I noticed that even from that, when you talk about mass reactions from different people, I get a massively different reaction now. I'm wearing a cap and I've got no hair. I'm living for it. I really do like it. But it's sometimes if you'll get different reactions from different people, because that's not it doesn't fit someone else's social perception of femininity. Obviously, I'm not really talking about something as substantive as that at the moment. I'm talking more about deeper issues, so I'm not really going to dwell on that in general. But as I say, so one person can't hold space for every single aspect of every single person, because that is not how we're designed. But I just feel like I am one of those people. I'm a hothead. Do you know what I mean? I will flip from 0 to 20 billion. And if I don't want to be medicated for the entire of my life, I really need to fix the scenario pathology within my brain that tells me that I have to react with aggression. And if I don't want to end up in prison again, obviously, if I don't have to act with aggression, and I don't have to act with through my own lens of trauma, which I love that phrase. I always used to talk about being in a lens of trauma. And I think the answer to that is actively, not only because I think visualization is a massive tool. Actually, if you think about how you want to be perceived, do you want to be perceived through a level of jumping from 0 to 100, or do you want to be perceived from a level of that person's actually got their head and they can move with some sense and respect for themselves and respect for other people, even though life might not be easy. When it comes down to it, they have that wit and they have that growth to be able to say, do you know what, I can actually stop for a second and make my life choice to actually navigate this situation with dignity for the other person, even though they're at their stage of life that they are. And I'm not talking about psychically assuming what the fuck's going to happen, and dealing with, because you get people at all ranges of life, some of which are criminal and some aren't, and some things aren't justifiable. That being said, for what it is, continue down my route of that. But and that's between one person and God to manage. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, be kind to. As I said, I don't really want to trundle down that route and go and tangent myself off for that amount of time. But it's just the level of constant focus, constant going back to that neuropathology, and it's really hard. It's really hard for ADHDers that have grown up in generational trauma to really clock onto that neuropathology when you've had to live in survival mode, when you've had to live in unfair circumstances, and when you've had to live, dealing with people that misjudge you and blah 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 blah. So we all have our own relative generational trauma to whatever degree that looks like. Say it's not trying to be social with all people at all times and be like, oh, I can imperfectly hold space for all of the people and all of their trauma and I'm trying to heal the world. It's not like that. It's like stopping in a situation where you can tell that someone is traumatized and be like, I'm not going to allow being triggered by this to affect my actions and affect my everyday movement for the rest of the day because of this trigger to myself. Because sometimes triggers are completely unconscious and you don't see what it is that is actually triggering you at that time, and I don't want to be like, I feel like I've come from a generational line of really short-tempered people. On my dad's side, I never felt I could go to my dad with anything because I knew he'd just flip his shit, and I know his mum was exactly the same, and I'm pretty sure his dad was like just justifying of that. And as I say, mental illness runs in my family line, but I don't want to continue that cycle, you know what I mean? And you can make that choice to be like, actually I'd rather not be short-tempered. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't change your physiology, but what you can do is in your logical brain make those justifications for as to why it's not necessary to actually go with that generational trauma. And I think sometimes if it's too much for your brain to handle, it's too like of a burden to bear, things like aggression and things like alcoholism. I feel like I've tackled alcoholism within my generation line as well, so I'm okay with expanding that. I mean, like, yes, like that's a win for me. Maybe it doesn't have a university degree label on it, but that's a pretty big win for me if you'd ask me. And I don't need anyone else to validate that. I'm just happy to sit there in my pride for a second and just be like, yes, well done. And that's okay, because I don't think people can do that well enough unless it comes with a fucking university sticker on it, which actually really fucks me off, because people should be proud of the little wins. That makes life enjoyable. And I think sometimes that is part of the issue, where people don't celebrate their little wins. They look to validation from other people, and then they look at someone that's not got what they perceive to be socially the most successful. I've done so many podcasts on success. The most successful, the most sought after thing. You haven't got your family, you haven't got your mortgage, this, that and the other. And it's like, okay, well, you don't deserve my human respect. And the fact is, we're all human beings, and if you're going to be a cunt, then you're going to be a cunt, and there are going to be people that will be, but it's like to choose whether you want to be a cunt or you don't is actually a really powerful choice. And I think especially when people get triggered by whatever it is that they're triggered by, and people that have had like really, really powerful trauma, you know, PTSD, CPTSD, sexual assault, physical assault, you know, it's really easy to get triggered to the point of overwhelm, and to actively make that choice to to actually be like, you know, I can make a choice here to hold space for my mental health, and that can look very different for many different people. You know what I mean? Having a gluten intolerance fucks up my mental well-being. I heard this aspect, and I don't know why it's taken me so long to honestly fathom this, but to look after your mental well-being, for some people that looks like taking lifelong medication. For other people that looks like going to the gym. You know what I mean? For other people it looks like just taking an adequate enough amount of rest after a long work day. It really varies from person to person, but it's like, if I'm not looking after my mental well-being, and this is, you know, this is regardless of generational trauma, that is one, you know, we all have autonomy to do that. Having come from a generational line of mental illness, I can advocate for that. Like, I have made that choice on whatever level to make new choices and to build new pathology and to explore the world in a different way, to the point where I don't have to continue this generational line of mental unwellness and this quick-temperedness, and I can actually evolve through the universe in ways that my ancestors have not, and that's powerful, and that's what everyone has to do. Do you know what I mean? Wow, I feel like that was a bit of a mic drop moment at the end, but as I say, I think if people, like, judgment is a really low vibrational emotion, and I think on a universal level it's really powerful to actually think, you know, on what level, because I think this is what carried me through school, and it's what carries me through hate comments on YouTube. Like, your level of hate is nowhere near as powerful as my level of pride, as my level of transcendence, of my level of peace. You know what I mean? And that's so important. And I think it's even on a generational level, like on a transcendent level of everydayness. My own level of generational trauma, my inner child, you know, fearing things. Fear is a very low vibrational emotion. My own level of fear and my own level of disdain for the situation or memory point that I am experiencing is so much less powerful than the transcendence and the peace I will gain through making active choices. It's like that thing, like, feed the wolves that you want to feed. Don't feed the fear. Like, it's okay to acknowledge the fear. It's not about ignoring the fear, because if you ignore the fear, it's just going to come out in every which way that you can imagine. But if you can keep in mind that fear point, it's a bit of a balancing act for some people. It really depends on what person you are, but it's the fact that if you hold space, it sounds really complicated, and I suppose it is a bit of an art, but it's like, if you can recognize that fear point is so much less powerful than the transcendence you then gain through making a different choice, that is so powerful. Like, that is all the power you really need. And I think sometimes the answer is within yourself, and it's like, you know, I'm there getting angry and shitty and stressed out because of other people I'm seeing that haven't got the same generational trauma as me, being like, oh, well, they've got this issue and seeing every single issue that I have, valid as that may be. I'm a very perceptive person. It's not for me to then use that as a reason to be bitter and find myself back in a rehabilitative, you know, state, be that through the prison system or otherwise, trying to tackle that trauma when I can find the tools in myself. So I'm going to leave it there, because I think that was quite a mic drop moment, and I'm going to go about my day, and I'm going to make better life choices, and I'm going to wake up triggered for whatever reason that I'm pretty unaware of, actually, because I think even sometimes if it's deep-rooted trauma, journaling can be a massive way to recognise what is triggering you. But at the same time, sometimes if you're triggered and you haven't got the time or space to journal at that time, but to still recognise that you are triggered, but also to decide in your logical brain to make the space and the choices to make healthier choices. And as I say, this is not, and I think, as I say, this is the swing back, just one last thing that I'll touch on before I go, which is that it's not about taking other people's shit that they fling at you. It's not about taking taking shit flung by shit flingers. It's about, you know, it's about holding respect for yourself and with that other people to the degree necessary, and maybe even on the air, if possible, of licking a bit of arse to the point where you can maybe even improve someone else's day, or actually just get through it without dealing with the shit that they've had to deal with that day, because you never know what the fuck someone else has to go through, whether it's a job, whether it's mental illness, whether it's trauma, whether it's, you know, children. Do you know what I mean? Like, everyone has separate life circumstances, undiagnosed neurodivergence. You know, we all experience it all every single day. and to, you know, it's powerful to, and it's, you know, it's different things for different people, but, you know, to count to 10, to have those tools to be like, I do not need to act out because of my triggeredness, and regardless of what my lizard brain is telling me, because that is the thing, it does come from a lizard brain, and not possibly a decision-making brain, because trauma is real. But if you override that with your decision-making brain, and you decide to make that pathology with a high vibrational emotion, which you can then attach to something to say, I would actually rather make a conscious choice about this situation rather than ride with my last known circumstances, is what the brain will do if you are unconscious about it. So yeah, that is all I want to say. Thank you for listening.